Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with our lab for this week. Again, this is a two-part section. So last week we did the nervous system, and this week we'll be focusing on our special senses. But at the end of last week's lab pages, so we haven't quite reorganized our lab manual, so on the bottom of page 30, it starts talking about some spinal cord anatomy, as well as into page 31 and 32. So we will also cover that for today at the beginning here. So let's get started. So we'll make sure we overview the spinal cord, peripheral nerves, visual system, and auditory system today. Typically in lab, we would do a sheep eye dissection. That is something that we obviously will not be focusing on for the online section, so you will not see any of those terms or anything within your lab quiz online. So with the spinal cord at the bottom of page 30, starting off with the horn, what you're looking at here is a cross section of a spinal cord. So this would be running up and down for the spine. All right, so this would be on the dorsal side and on the ventral side. So this would be like the front of the body. This would be toward the back of the body. So this up in front here, we'd have like the stomach, the front of the body, and in the back, the spine going down the body here. So we have these different areas of horns. You don't necessarily need to memorize the different horns, but you do need to kind of have a gist or an understanding of what you're looking at here. So I have a couple things labeled that you can utilize for understanding where you're at. So just like our brain, when we did our anatomy, just like our brain, when we did our anatomical sections of our brain last week, we looked at white versus gray matter. The same thing applies to this nervous tissue within the spine. So we have our dark matter consisting of cell bodies running along on the inside here and the horns, and then we have our white matter running along in what we call the columns. All right, so horns are bundles of neuron cell bodies. So this will be in the gray matter. We have our posterior horns, our lateral horns, and then our anterior horns. And then we have our columns. So these are bundles of axons. They're myelinated, so that myelin has fat on it, and so they're going to be surrounding the axons to help conductivity for electrical signaling running down that axon. So that's where they're going to be kind of traveling through cell bodies, axons here. The central canal is going to be where the cerebrospinal fluid is going to be flowing. We talked about the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid last week. When it starts going down past the fourth ventricle and down to the spinal cord, this is where it's going to run through, and then back up to go around through the subarachnoid space of the brain. Then we have spinal nerves. So that's kind of what you're going to be seeing here. So we have our dorsal root ganglion coming in through our dorsal root of our spinal cord. All right, so we will only have dorsal root ganglion, we'll never have ventral root ganglion, and that's because our dorsal root ganglion consists of neuron cell bodies that are from sensory input. So we don't have sensory input coming from our body back out, so that's why we won't have ventral root ganglion. We'll only have dorsal root ganglion because it's receiving sensory information from outside the body. So say like you touched on your fingertip, it receives sensory information, travels through your finger, through your arm, to your spinal cord. Before it gets there, it lands on this dorsal root ganglion, which is a bundle of cell bodies, and then it continues on into the spinal cord, where then it would track up to the spinal cord to your brain to tell you that something touched your fingertip. Well, if you needed to move your fingertip, it would travel back down from your brain, controlling that motor function through the spinal cord and then out through the ventral root, which will carry motor information from the central nervous system or from the spinal cord to the body to maybe move your finger, such as if you touched something hot and you needed to move your finger. That would be more of a reflex, so that would actually travel through a reflex arc straight through the dorsal root ganglion, and it wouldn't go up to the brain. It would just keep, it would make a synapse here on an interneuron in the posterior horn or in the lateral horn, and then continue out through the ventral root here via a motor neuron. But That was a lot of physiology stuff that we cover in lecture, just to try to make sense of what you're looking at here. What you really just need to be able to understand is that we have our dorsal root, and you'll see a dorsal root ganglion there, a little ball, like bulging sac coming in. That's how you know you're looking at the dorsal side here. Okay, so if you see a big bulge coming in through this spinal cord, or spinal nerve into the spinal cord, you'll see that that is the dorsal root ganglion. The bottom one will just be consistently round throughout the entire nerve, and that's the ventral root. So that'll be motor neurons going out. And you can also kind of get your bearings, because the larger horn is going to be where a lot of those ventral motor neuron cell bodies are going to be starting, and then axons protruding out. Okay, so there'll be a lot more clustered, bigger in there in that anterior horn, because all the cell bodies got to clump in there, just like the cell bodies for sensory information are clumping in this ganglion, making it bigger here. This anterior horn is bigger with motor neuron cell bodies. So understand that the white matter is consisting of columns, the gray matter is consisting of your neuron cell bodies, right? So cell bodies in the gray matter, axons in the white matter. And then understand if you're looking at the ventral root versus the dorsal root, and whether or not this is a ganglion for the dorsal root. So here's a good question for you. Where does sensory information enter the spinal cord? This is kind of just a catch-all. I throw this out in the middle of lecture and wait for people to answer. Obviously, I can't do that since we're doing this asynchronously. And then I could ask, where does motor information leave the spinal cord? Well, since we're doing this asynchronously, I kind of just told you, but this is a good reboot just in case you're going through and pausing and taking notes throughout. Feel free to pause right now. Make sure you know the answer before I say the answer in a couple seconds here. So, where does sensory information enter the spinal cord? It is via the dorsal root, right? That dorsal root ganglion is a good landmark for you to figure out where you're looking here. And then, where does the motor information leave the spinal cord? It's via the ventral root. Why is there no ventral root ganglion? Well, ganglion is for incoming sensory nerve cell bodies, whereas motor nerve cell bodies originate in the spinal cord in that anterior horn. So looking here, we're looking at a cross-section of our spinal cord, and if we take a snapshot of one of these ganglion, right, we're looking at one of these dorsal root ganglion coming in here, you see all these different sensory neuron cell bodies on their way in. So they're coming in through their axons, and then they got to make a quick stop here, and these unipolar neurons here, so they can help make sure that the signal is able to communicate onward. And the anterior route will just be straight up. And so what we'll be seeing here, this is kind of like a motor reflex here. So say skin maybe feels something hot, we'll come in, this will be where the ganglion cell bodies are, the neuron cell bodies, the sensory cell bodies, coming in through the dorsal root here, and then you'll see the cell bodies are bigger in the anterior horn of the spinal cord because the cell bodies are present there, whereas there's no cell bodies necessarily right here coming into the dorsal, so it'll be smaller and then bigger in the anterior horn, and then we'll bounce back out through the efferent nerve pathway and affect a muscle to maybe move the finger from burning anymore. So that's your pathway, a little bit of physiology to help make sense of that too. Now we can talk about some peripheral nerves. This is very much going to be on your own, just making sure that you understand where you're looking at. Break down the Latin roots. At this point, we've already looked at the bones, so you should have an understanding of some of these words already for what we're talking about. So when we're talking about cervical, we're talking about a region around the neck. So if I say cervical plexus, plexus just means it's a branching network of intersecting nerves. So it just means it's a bunch of nerves. So we can look around the neck, and we can see that this is the cervical plexus, right? So this is a bunch of nerves around the neck. That's where you're going to be looking for the cervical plexus. For the phrenic nerve, we're going to find that one on a different slide here. I'll get to that shortly here, but that'll be kind of close to that region as well. It's just kind of busy here, so they couldn't sneak it in there. The brachial plexus is going to consist of regions dealing with the arms, and so it's going to be bouncing off by the shoulders. Okay, so you got brachial plexus by the traps here, And so it's going to be branching off into the arms. And so we'll see the radial nerve, and that's going to be going toward the radius. So it'll be more toward the outside of your arm, looking at anatomical position. And then ulnar is going to be more toward the inside. So it's kind of hard to see here, but this would be the ulnar, more toward the inside. See, if he's in anatomical position, thumb out. Ulnar is going to be along where the ulna is of the arm. And the radius is going to travel here all the way on the outside more so. The median one is going to be the middle. So radial is it's gonna go out this way. It looks kind of conjumbled up in here, but this would be the radial nerve. This would be the medial nerve, or median. So it goes radius, or radial, medial, ulnar. So ulnar always on the inside, radial on the outside, median in the middle. And then we have our lumbar plexus. So this gets pretty busy as well, but this is going to be branching off into where we will have our lumbar vertebra. So we looked at the lumbar vertebra in our skeletal system. So look at the bottom part of the back. And so there will just be the femoral nerve that you need to be knowing coming off of this one. So we can kind of look around here. We have the genitofemoral nerve that'll be bouncing off into here. But in reality, we won't give you a very busy diagram by any means when it comes to looking at these nerves. So if you look at some of the models that we have set out, they're a little bit less busy than this particular diagram. But this is a good one because it has all of these different nerves to show you how complex it can be. So femoral nerve, look around the femur, okay? And then the sciatic nerve is going to be going across the sciatic. This is a pretty painful nerve to have spasms. A lot of people have pinching in their lower back as they get older, and they feel sciatic pain. That's along the sciatic nerve, all right? So going down kind of like the iliotibial band region. Once we get to the muscular system, kind of radiates down the side of the leg, around the hip here. Whereas the femoral nerve is going to be traveling literally right in the front, kind of like down the quad almost, at the front of the leg. So sciatical nerve will be a little bit more to the side, whereas the femoral nerve will be more toward the front. And here we have that phrenic nerve. All right, so that phrenic nerve is going to be more toward the middle of the body, kind of below that cervical plexus. So here we can kind of see the ulnar nerve on the inside, the medial nerve on the inside, and the radial nerve on the outside. We have our sacral plexus, which will have that sciatic nerve branching down. And then we have our lumbar plexus, which will have that femoral nerve branching down as well. So think of the femoral nerve more as toward the head of the femur, and the sciatic nerve more going down the leg a little bit more.